evening and welcome to the magnificent McEwan Hall. Isn't this just an absolutely fantastic venue to have our event tonight? Oh, yes. Somebody's very excited already. We've got a great evening in store for you. We've got a great programme, and of course, we've got the perfect blend of music and politics. And to get things underway, I want to just take us back to 2 weeks ago, where Jeremy launched his campaign, and he talked about it being a people-powered campaign. And tonight we're in Edinburgh, and I want to know, are you part of that people-powered campaign? Are you ready? Are you ready to kick out Boris Johnson? Are you ready? Are you ready to kick out this callous Tory government? Are you ready? Because we are ready. We are ready for a new kind of government. We are ready for a new kind of politics. And I know that you're ready too. So before we get to the politics, let's start with some music. And I'd like to introduce you to Mersal, who will warm us up nicely out of the cold and give them a big cheer. Mersal.
And idle by the hours, and years sift so slowly. Every single grain of the sands of time. And are you still living alone? And do you still call it the calm before the storm? And heavy on rhetoric and lacking in practice, how many thoughts have died by your uncalloused hand? And are you still on that earth? And are you still straining for ways to make it work? And I am ready for the rapture, and for great things to happen. I am primed and I am waiting, but nothing ever seems to happen. And all that it took was one little push, and I am a new boy, and I'm living in an old town with a new frame of mind and the same sad heart. I'm a new boy, I'm living in an old town Thank you very much. Cheers.
Great start to our evening tonight. The next musician that we're going to introduce is my friend and colleague Callum Baird. Callum is an Edinburgh boy who has toured across the UK and Europe. Put your hands together, give a big warm Edinburgh welcome for the homeboy, Callum Baird.
Good start. All right, how we doing? Come on, I know it's Thursday night. I know you can reach out and feel the weekend, but I didn't just dump a portfolio of paperwork on your desk. I asked you, how are you doing? That's better. This first song, I'm going to do two songs tonight. Both of them are requests. This first one was requested by our excellent candidate in Edinburgh North and Leith, Mr. Gordon Munro. And it's dedicated to anyone in this room who's a member of the CW, but to all CW members across the country who have had their democratic right to strike taken away from them. There's power in the factory, power in the land, power in the hands of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. In the cities and the farmlands, the trenches full of mud, was always been the bosses' way, sir. The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black leg, all workers unite with our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in our union. Now I long for the morning that they realize brutality and unjust laws cannot defeat us. But who'll defend the worker who cannot organize when the bosses send their lackeys out to cheat us? Money speaks for money, the devil for his own. Who'll come to speak for the skin and the bone? What a comfort to the widow, or a light to the child. There is power in our union. down with the black leg. All workers unite with our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in our union. Solidarity with your postie. Okay, this is my second request, and it comes from our very special guest this evening, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. I don't normally get asked to do requests, and it's nice to be asked, and it's not Wonderwall or Ed Sheeran for a change, so. And I'm loving the acoustics in here. Gordon, the sound man, when I was sound checking, said it's like Dylan at the Albert Hall. Well, I'm going to take that. I'm going to milk that for everything. It's like singing in the bathroom, only better. This song's for Jeremy Corbyn, and it's for the people of Chile. If you might have seen, if you watched the news, that 1 million people took to the streets in Chile last week to protest neoliberalism and brutal austerity measures applied by their government. This is called the Victor Jara song. Victor Jara of Chile lived like a shooting star. He fought for the people of Chile with his songs and his guitar. His hands were gentle and his hands were strong. Victor was a peasant boy, barely 6 years old, when he sat upon his father's plough and watched the earth unfold. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. When the neighbours had a wedding, or one of their children died, his mother sang all night for them with Victor by her side. Her hands were gentle, her hands were strong. He grew up to be a fighter, stood against what was wrong. He learned of people's grief and joy, and he turned it into song. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. He sang for the copper miners and those who farmed the land. When he sang for the factory workers, they knew Victor was their man. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. He campaigned for Allende, he canvassed night and day, singing, take hold of your brother's hand, the future starts today. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. When Pinochet took Chile, they arrested Victor then and caged him in the stadium with 5,000 frightened men. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Victor picked up his guitar, his voice resounded strong. He caged them in the stadium till the guards could shout his song. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. They broke the bones in both his hands, beat him on the head, tortured him with electric wire. The cowards shot him dead. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. like a shooting star. He fought for the people of Chile with his songs and his guitar. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Thank you very much, comrades. Thank you. I'll see you on the campaign trail. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree that's a great way to start this evening. And I want to really just take us back to this venue here. This venue is used for the graduation ceremonies from Edinburgh University. And I think that's quite apt, because we're all here tonight to play our part in helping graduate Labour from opposition into government on the 12th of December. That's our plan. But I've got some questions for you here tonight, and I really want to know how ready you are. Are you ready for a Labour government that's going to pay £10 per hour minimum wage, lifting nearly 700,000 people in Scotland into a new way of living, lifting them out of poverty? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for a Labour government who will build 120,000 council and social houses? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for a Labour government that will ban zero-hours contracts? Are you ready for a Labour government? Are you ready for a Labour government that will deal with climate change and bring a real green industrial revolution to our economy? Well, I'm so glad that you're ready, because I'm now going to introduce to you someone who is absolutely ready. Ready to be our First Minister, ready to deliver for Scotland. Please put your hands together. Raise the roof for Richard Leonard.
Thank you very much. So this is what a Labour Party meeting on a Thursday night in Edinburgh looks like. Listen, I want to say this about Callum. You know, somebody once said that socialism without a cultural dimension is a desert, and they are absolutely right, because we are for roses as well as bread as a Labour movement. Although I am bound to say that I don't know what Keir Hardie would think about a Labour Party rally in a hall donated by a brewer. You know, Jenny Lee. Anyone here heard of Jenny Lee? Jenny Lee graduated in this hall. And you know, 90 years ago this year, Jenny Lee was elected to Parliament for the constituency of North Lanarkshire. And she was part of that 1945 generation which swept away the austerity of wartime, invested in the public infrastructure, built a national health service, committed to a welfare state to look after people from the cradle to the grave. And that's the kind of vision the Labour Party is putting to the people in this election. And we celebrate as well this year, 2019, the 50th anniversary of the creation of the Open University, another visionary move by a progressive Labour government. Comrades and friends, there is no doubt, though, that we are in the fight of our lives. But I stand before you tonight with the absolutely firm conviction that this is an election that we can win. And I do not just mean that we will sneak into office as a minority government in a hung parliament. I mean that we have got the opportunity to elect a majority Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn. And let me say this as well, for the benefit of any doubters out there. We have the opportunity to win this election with a majority Labour government installed on the 13th of December. Not despite of the fact that Jeremy Corbyn has got integrity and principles, but because of the fact that Jeremy Corbyn has got principles and integrity. So to those parties and to those party leaders who are issuing demands or who are threatening not to support a Labour government, I say if you choose that path, you will have to answer to the people. But we are standing because we want to win a majority Labour government, so there will be no pacts, no deals and no coalitions. We want a clear-cut Labour majority. And we want that Labour majority, not for the benefit of people here tonight, but for the benefit of those people I've been meeting over the last few weeks. People like those who I met a fortnight ago in the food bank in Drumchapel, a community up and against it, resilient but defiant, self-organising because they know with a Tory government and an SNP government they cannot rely on the state. Like those Asda workers, those GMB members who marched to the Scottish Parliament just 3 weeks ago because they are facing the threat of dismissal if they do not agree to a reduction in their terms and conditions of employment, lower pay, longer hours, fewer holidays. And they are facing this threat by a company which is owned by the richest billionaires on the entire planet. So don't say to me that working people don't understand when the Labour Party says in this election that we want not just a redistribution of wealth, we want a redistribution of power in this economy and a change for people. And I tell you who else knows and understands why we need a redistribution of wealth and power. It's those waspy women that came all the way down from Aberdeen to lobby Jeremy and me just yesterday. They understand why we need a redistribution of power. And to all of those workers who over the last decade have seen their living standards squeezed, we can see all around us the hardship and the injustice, but we can also see the hope and the resistance building up again. And let me just be clear to anybody listening to this, that those people that I describe are not being targeted because they're Scottish, They're being targeted because they're disabled, because they're young, because they were born in the wrong decade, or because they are part of the industrious working class of this country. That's why they're being targeted. Jeremy Corbyn and I have stood together on platforms down the years, but none have been as important as this one here in Edinburgh tonight, because the stakes are high. It is a battle, of course, in this election for the people's votes in order to get seats to send Labour MPs to Parliament. But the election as well has got a much broader resonance, because it's about what kind of society it is that we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where poverty rises, where 1 in 4 children in Scotland live in poverty? And the great scandal is this: 2 out of 3 of those children who live in poverty live in a household where at least 1 adult is in work. So we see the rise of in-work poverty, the great scandal of our time. And we see not only that income inequality, we see wealth inequality, so that the richest 1% in Scotland today own more personal wealth than the whole of the poorest 50% put together. And that's why we need change. That's why we need a different set of values in our society. And there's another value that we want to see as well, a value of openness, because we are a party which does not want to see national boundaries and borders going up. We want to see national boundaries and borders coming down. You know, I've never understood why the SNP advocate unity across Europe but oppose it inside the United Kingdom. And we've got a choice as a society as well, whether we decide to deny or whether we decide to tackle climate change. And we need to face up to this, not just for today's generation, but for tomorrow's generations. We need to face up to it in the context, not just of the rich global north, but in the context of the poor global south as well. And we need to have an approach which is based on a planned economy, with an industrial strategy and a just transition. Because I tell you what, if anybody says that market forces will bring about the change that we need in our economy, go try telling that to those workers at BIFAB. Tell that to those workers being made redundant at CS Wind in Machrihanish. Let me say to you tonight, in the time that I've got, there are 2 things that this election is not about. This is a general election. It is not a referendum on a referendum. And to reduce it to that is to turn our backs on all those people who need massive social and economic change. Let me tell you what else, in my view, it's not simply about. It's not simply about kicking Boris Johnson out of Downing Street, although that is part of the plan. And in fact, let me tell you, I don't know whether anybody has seen this, but the SNP put out a letter last week appealing to Remain voters, in which they said people needed to vote SNP, and I quote them, to deprive the Tories of their majority. Well, the Labour Party isn't standing in this election with the low ambition of depriving the Tories of their majority. We are standing on this election to elect a socialist government to change the way this whole country works. So it's our job, over the next 28 days to get across our message and tell people not just what we are against, but what we are for as a party, what we stand for, and what we will do when we get into government to change this country, not just for the next few years, but for future generations. We are the only party standing in this election which is putting the choice back to the people on Brexit. We are the only party. We are the only party giving people the choice in the cold light of day, that is offering them the choice to vote Remain as an option in that referendum. We are the only party which is pledged to end austerity, the only party which is talking about investment to end the years of in-work poverty, not to mitigate, not to reform the universal credit system, but to scrap once and for all the universal credit system. And we're not making a secret of this. In fact, we're shouting it from the rooftops. We are the only party in this election which is standing up once again for public ownership of public services. Because the profit motive, the shareholder dividend, should have no place in our National Health Service. It should have no place on our railways. It should have no place in our Royal Mail. It should have no place in our educational institutions. And after this week, let us also be clear in our message. The shareholder dividend and the profit motive should never have any place in our asylum system either. We are the only party in this election, and we are not a party of capital in the end, we are a party of Labour, which is talking about trade union rights and workers' rights. We're talking because you can have all the employment laws in the world and all the statutory rights, but unless you've got a trade union to enforce them, they are only words on the page. And our opponents, including the SNP, who in their growth commission are offering what they describe as a clear-sighted prospectus. It's a clear-sighted prospectus for another decade of austerity. So we are the only party offering the hope for people of investment. And you know, somebody else wrote something recently that said, the Labour Party of today is no longer the party of Red Clydeside. Well, I've got news. We are once again talking about socialism in our time. We are talking about hope out of despair. These are the very things that Jenny Lee, that John Wheatley, that Jimmy Maxton and all the Red Clydesiders fought for the years. And so we are once again in this election promoting a people's agenda to end poverty, tackle inequality, invest in but also defend the National Health Service, build homes for all, offer people education, lifelong learning, but also give people, our young people especially, good work, useful jobs. And we need once again to re-establish the principle that as a society, we will offer people the helping hand from the cradle to the grave. So we want dignity in retirement for people as well. So only Labour in this election can make the difference. You know, in the end, the choice before the people when they put their cross on that ballot paper is, do they want a Tory government led by Boris Johnson, or do they want a Labour government introducing progressive policies led by Jeremy Corbyn as our Prime Minister? That's the choice. And to the people of Scotland, we say this: for the avoidance of doubt, the only way to elect a Labour government is to elect Labour MPs from Scottish constituencies. There is no shortcut to a Jeremy Corbyn government through the SNP. So let's get the message across that it's only a Labour government that can defeat the Tories. But more than that, it's only a Labour government that's offering people a progressive vision of the different kind of society that we want to build, to rebalance the economy, to tackle global warming, to bring about the renaissance we need in our public services. That's what the Labour Party is fighting this election on. And we've got 28 days to persuade people to come out and vote for that vision. And I'll tell you, in conclusion, that it will be up to us, those of us in this hall. Nobody else will do it for us. It's up to us. We can win this election. We will win this election if we put our minds to it, roll up our sleeves, get out there and get Labour MPs elected from Scotland, because that is the difference between the election of a Labour government or not. So the burden of responsibility rests weightily on our shoulders, but it's a responsibility that this party has risen to before and will rise to again. So let's get out there. Let's get Labour MPs elected. Let's get it done, not for our own sakes, but for the sake of all of those people in all of those workplaces and all of those communities who need a Labour government. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. I said a little bit at the beginning of my speech about Labour history, and that's important because we are not a party that anymore wants to deny our past. We are proud of our past as a movement and as a party, but we are also looking to the future, which is why it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who came through the ranks of the Labour movement campaigning to get fair tips at work for hospitality workers, who understood that there is so much we can achieve industrially, but so much more we can achieve politically when we organise together. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight a new Labour Party member who represents not just the present but the future of this party. Put your hands together for Katie Phillips. Thank you very much.
My name is Katie. I'm a 23-year-old bar worker from Coatbridge. For the past 5 years, I have worked with 0-hour contracts, earning just above the minimum wage with no real say in how my workplace was run. Last year, after a formal procedure meant our tips were taken off us and out of our control, my colleagues and I decided enough was enough and joined the Union for Bar Workers Unite Hospitality. We put together a collective grievance demanding 100% of tips to staff. We drove around people's houses, and within a week we had a massive majority of the workplace signed up to a union. During our campaign for fair tips, we sought support from various politicians. The only politicians to support our campaign was our local Labour MP, Hugh Gaffney, and of course Jeremy Corbyn. We cornered him with our homemade posters, and to our amazement, not only did he support us, but he listened to us for 20 minutes. There was no cameras around, he just genuinely wanted to hear our story and offer what help he could to our campaign. We won that campaign and now receive 100% of tips thanks to my colleagues. A progressive company willing to listen to its employees, our union, and Jeremy Corbyn. Since then, we have grown our union across a whole chain, and so far we have gotten rid of 0-hour contracts, unpaid trial shifts, and youth rates across Scotland. The company is now looking at implementing a real living wage by next year. A year ago, I was not political, not because I didn't care about politics, but because no politician had ever spoken to me, literally or figuratively, until now. I'm not just supporting Labour because I think young workers deserve £10 an hour and minimum hours that they can actually depend on, but because their leader actually cares about the people he represents. Yesterday, he took the time out to speak to our hospitality friends at the Glasgow School of Art who are fighting the closure of their workplace. If we are going to win this election and get rid of the vicious Tory government, we need to get out there and make it happen. It's not enough to just vote. We have to canvass, we have to convince our friends and family. It's people power that will make the difference, and in this room, we have an abundance of it. There are clipboards with volunteers all over the hall. Please fill in your details to help us win. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage our next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Edinburgh, and thank you for coming to this unbelievable and magnificent hall. I've never spoken in such a magnificent hall before, and it's nice to have it filled tonight to the sounds of socialism and justice. Katie, thank you for what you said. Thank you for being an inspiring young person, inspiring us to bring about a fairer, better and more just society. Thank you for representing the spirit of young people who want to live in a better, fairer, more equal, more sustainable world and don't buy into the rat race. Don't buy into the rat race which is only ever for rats to race in, as Jimmy Reed once said. I also want to say a big thank you to Callum for singing what he did this evening. Because to me, our movement, our party, our campaign, our socialism is about all the issues that we speak of all the time. But it's also about the human spirit. It's also about creativity. It's also about the ambition and ideas that people have, particularly children and young people have, to write poetry, to paint art, and to perform music. In my kind of world, you can't have socialism without music. And so when Callum sung on the words of Victor Hara, I think we should recall the life of Victor Hara, a brilliant singer, musician, guitar player, poet and songwriter who stood up for the working class in Chile, campaigned all over the country in Chile, and that brought about an election result in 1970 in which Salvador Allende became the president of Chile. That government was attacked from the moment it was elected by the richest and most powerful landowners in that country, by those that owned the minerals and the mineral rights, and attacked by powerful countries outside, such as the United States. And despite all of that, they built houses for the poor, they gave milk to the children in the schools, and they developed an education system which had never been made available to working class children in Chile before. All that while, people campaigned to support that government, and Victor Hara kept his writing, kept his singing, kept his music, and kept inspiring people, despite the most difficult days that government ever faced. And then, when the planes bombed the Moneda Palace and when the tanks rolled through the streets, and Allende died in the Moneda Palace, Victor Hara and thousands of others were rounded up and taken to the National Stadium. And when he got to the National Stadium, what did Victor do? He sang with all the other prisoners there in the National Stadium. So what did the soldiers do? Arrested him, beat him, and smashed his hands that he could never play the guitar again, before they finally killed Victor. Think of the spirit of people like Victor Hara, who laid down their lives that there could be social justice for all in the future. Remember them for the inspiration and power that they were and are to all of us. And this great city of Edinburgh gave amazing solidarity to the people of Chile throughout all those years. And I'm looking at my great friend Gordon Munro, who hopefully will be the MP for Edinburgh North and Leith. And for all that Gordon has done during all the years that I've known him, to always stand up against injustice anywhere in the world without fear and without favour. Gordon, thank you for what you do. And we're now in the 4 weeks to go period of the general election. 4 weeks today, we are going to be all running around the streets in our own communities reminding people to vote. We're going to tell them you've got 1 hour, 55 minutes and 30 seconds by my watch to get out there and vote. We're into the fight of our lives in this election campaign. We're into the fight of our lives because of what we believe in and because of what we want to achieve in this election. 9 years ago, after the 2010 election, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats decided to form a coalition government. They were willing partners. They went into that government together and they introduced an emergency budget a few months later. And what did that emergency budget do? Froze public sector wages, slashed benefit payments, cut payments to local authorities in England, cut payments to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. It went on to introduce universal credit and all the horrors that have come with that. It went on to treble university fees in England to £9,000 a year. It went on to introduce tribunal fees, and it went on to preside over an ever-worsening situation for the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. Now, 9 years on, you see the results of what austerity is really about. Homeless people sleeping on the streets of every major city in this country. Children going hungry on their way to school. Middle-aged people who thought life was going to be better for them as they got a bit older and their kids got a bit older, suddenly finding that they're deeply in debt, trying to pay for their children to go through university and older parents to receive some degree of social care that they should be entitled to by the provision of the rest of us. And you see the effects of falling incomes, and you see the effect of depression in towns all around. In many constituencies across Scotland, there are roughly 4,000 or 5,000 people in each constituency who receive personal independence payments, which are actually quite difficult to get. And then you look through the statistics and drill down into them, and you find that 30 or 40% of those people are getting them because of what's called psychiatric disorders, in other words, mental health stress. We're living in a country and a society, the fifth richest in the world, while we're presiding over an ever-widening gap between the poorest and the richest, and we're seeing the consequences of that in underachieving children in our schools, people going hungry, people sleeping rough, food banks abounding everywhere, and the stress levels get worse and worse. And then you look at the horrors of the way the universal credit system works, and you begin to realize what it's all about. Before the 2010 election, Ian Duncan Smith went to Easterhouse and announced he wanted to end poverty and help the people of Easterhouse. The last time I was there, they said they wanted him to come back because they wanted to talk to him. They wanted to tell him a few home truths about what had happened to their lives. And when you have a system that says the third, fourth child of a family are not as important as the first or second, when you have a system that says a child that is born as a result of rape of a woman may not get benefits unless that poor woman, that victim, goes through the most excruciating form-filling exercise to prove that she was raped. You ask yourself what happened to humanity, what happened to decency, what happened to moral outrage in our society? And so, our party will end universal credit and return to a system of social security. And I was very proud to announce that policy in the Market Square in a small town on the edge of London known as Chingford, which is currently represented by Ian Duncan Smith. I thought it would be a subtle message, but I have to say, last Saturday, there were 500 Labour campaigners in Chingford and Woodford Green, and we're going to win Chingford and Woodford Green, and we're going to win constituencies all over the country. Because we have to deal with the consequences of all these years of austerity and the horrors and damage they've done to our society and to people's estimation of themselves and their own lives. And I'm determined that we do go out there to win this election campaign. Because there is something that tells me it is just not right to be in the fifth richest country in the world and witness these degrees of inequality. So when I describe the poverty that has taken place, the fact that there are 150,000 people in Scotland waiting for social housing, when you have so many thousands of children living poor lives all across Scotland, when you have life expectancy in Glasgow, the lowest anywhere in the UK, when you have health inequalities across every major city in Scotland and in England and in Wales, where you live 10 years longer in the wealthier suburbs than you do in the inner city areas, something tells me life has gone badly wrong, and our sense of justice and our outrage has gone badly wrong in that. So fundamentally, our message is about one of social justice that brings a sense of decency to people's lives, and that is foremost of what we would do. Somebody asked me the other day, what's the first thing you would like to do when you go into office on the 13th of December? Lots of things, hundreds of things. I could ask all of you what your priority would be, and you'd probably all come up with lots of different things, all of which you feel burningly passionate about. We all do. That's why we're in the Labour Party. I just thought for a second or two, and I thought, well, actually, the thing I would really like to do is use the power of government, the power of office, to end rough sleeping homelessness once and for all across the country. And there's much, much else that we want to do, we would want to do as an incoming government, and we are very, very determined to do it. But we have to recognise what is also going on the other side, what Boris Johnson is actually up to. He wanted to take Britain out of the European Union on a no-deal exit, knowing full well what the consequences of that would be, knowing full well the dangers to trade, to jobs, to standards, and to the lives of many European Union nationals that have made their home in this country and have partnerships with people in this country. He doesn't care about that. And also the many British people that live in different parts of the European Union and work there and contribute to their societies there. And so I just want to put it absolutely clearly on the record. I, for one, say thank you to all those people from different parts of Europe that have made their homes in our society, made a fantastic contribution to our lives, and helped us to achieve health and education and so much else. And I say shame on those Tories that seek to scapegoat migrants and migrant workers. Shame on those Tories that brought about the hostile environment, which was so disgraceful and disgusting to people coming from Africa and the Caribbean that made their homes here. And it's very hard when constituents of mine come to me who thought they were safe and secure in Britain because they've been here all those years, worked in the National Health Service, worked on transport, worked in factories, worked as carers, all the wonderful work they've done, suddenly being told, well, you don't belong here, we're going to deport you. That was not a mistake. It was deliberately organised by a Tory government with the support of the Liberal Democrats in Westminster to create a hostile environment. So I think it's very fitting that our front bench contains two daughters of the Windrush generation who are determined to make sure that doesn't happen to others. But Johnson and his threats of a no-deal exit, were actually to reconfigure our relationship with the rest of the world, to reconfigure our trade relationship with the United States. And so he would take us straight into the arms of Donald Trump and a trade deal with the United States. And that's still his big plan. Anyone who's looked at anything to do with US trade deals will know the US doesn't do equity in trade deals. It does the one-way trade deals. And when I am accused of scaremongering because I say the NHS is at risk, our National Health Service is at risk because of American involvement in it, I've nothing against American people. I've full support and full of admiration for the American generation that fought and defeated racism, for the generation that's bringing the Green New Deal, for Bernie Sanders and AOC and so many others. I'm absolutely with them. But when our Prime Minister announces that he wants to go and talk to the USA and says that health isn't an issue, and then the US President himself says that our health market must be put at the disposal of American companies as part of any trade deal, the US ambassador backs him up, and then Johnson instructs British officials to go to the USA to have secret talks with US pharmaceutical companies. Well, you kind of say, well, why the secrecy? What have you got to hide? What is going on here? For a man who painted $350 million a week on a bus that he claimed was going to the European Union, seems quite prepared to countenance spending $500 million a week going to the USA to their drug companies and their pharmaceutical companies. So, this election is about a lot of things. And what the election is about will not be decided by journalists based in Edinburgh, London, or anywhere else. It'll be decided by the people on the streets of this country what the issues in this election are. And I just make it clear, from the point of view of the Labour Party, we don't have a health market in Britain. That health market was closed down in 1948 when we established the National Health Service. And I just make it very, very clear, our NHS is not for sale to anybody. And so we will have an offer put to the people of a sensible relationship with Europe and put that alongside Remain, and people can make their choice. My whole strategy, our party's whole strategy, has been to bring people together on this. Because if you voted Remain and you're on universal credit, you're on the housing waiting list and you're on a 0-hours contract job, and you put that alongside somebody else in a different part of the country who voted Leave and is in exactly the same position, don't let them divide you against each other. Your interests are in getting rid of a government that is trying to divide you anyway. And so we go into this campaign as a party and a movement utterly determined to win it. It is about the social justice that I've spoken of ending universal credit, of building houses and investing for the future. But it's also about rights, rights at work, rights to contribute and rights to participate in our society. There's always something struck me as a big difference, that you have democratic rights in your life. You can vote in elections, you've got the right to free speech, right to assembly, and all the things that are so important within our fundamental values of human rights. When you go to work, you don't necessarily have those same rights. You don't necessarily enjoy those same rights and stability at work. And so, we will set up a Department of Employment Rights. That Department of Employment Rights will guarantee that from day one of your employment, you've got full rights at work. That your full rights at work, including the right to join a trade union and be represented by that trade union, and we will repeal the Trade Union Act for the damage it's done to trade unionism. So it is all of these things that we are determined to do. But it's also about pay levels. Austerity was brought in 2010, accompanied by wage freezes, cutbacks, and so on. And it's also been a process of deindustrialization, of loss of jobs in manufacturing industry, and lack of investment in our society as a whole that is a problem. And so we will change things quite a lot. In addition to the rights at work that I've talked about, I think we need a real living wage of £10 an hour for all workers, including young workers who are often so exploited in the workplace. And this is part of a process of beginning to rebalance our society, because most people in work, on average wages, have a spending power between 20 and 25% less now than it was 10 years ago. And so we live in a society that is grossly unequal. That inequality is encouraged by government policy, encouraged by the tax breaks, the giveaways, encouraged by the empowerment of employers to treat workers so grievously, whether on 0 hours contracts. People that had good jobs in big industries in the past, industries that were closed down by Thatcher's Tories in the 1980s, have been replaced by something horrible. I'll give you an example. Shirebrook Colliery in Nottinghamshire, fantastic place, secure employment, strong union representation, and actually mining had become quite safe by that stage because of the representations of the National Union of Mine Workers and others that brought that about. Replaced by warehouse industries with 0 hours contracts and hardly any rights at work at all. And workers that then complain because they're on a 0 hours contract and unhappy about their conditions suddenly find they don't get any work at all. Imagine what it's like. We used to complain about dock workers and building workers having to queue up in the morning and hope to get a day's work. It was insulting, it was degrading, it was immoral, it was wrong. Unions fought back against that and got regulated work on docks and regulated work on building sites. Studying your mobile phone all day, waiting for a message from an employer that might give you a few hours work or might not, or might decide you must come in at a time that is impossible for yourself, if not, you lose the job. It might be less dirty than standing around in the street waiting for somebody to turn up and employ you, but the principle is not that different, that you're disempowered and the employer is completely empowered. We will end 0 hours contracts once and for all. And give people those rights at work that they so desperately need and I believe should be entitled to. And so I want to lead a government that's proud to be part of the International Labour Organization and will adhere to all its requirements and all its conventions. It's there for a purpose. We can't lecture other countries around the world about observing ILO conventions if we don't do it ourselves. So we will be doing that. But it's also about investment and creating the jobs for the future. That is a key part of it. John McDonnell, our Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and his team have done an incredible job over the past past 4 years. What they've done is debated and argued the case for an investment-led economy, argued the case against the short-sightedness of austerity and what can be achieved within our society. So they have actually changed the whole debate on the economy. But we haven't yet won an election, which is what we're determined to do. Our proposals are for a national investment bank and transformation funds that accompany it, regional transformation funds in England, and, of course, working in Scotland with an investment bank for Scotland. There will be £70 billion of investment coming into Scotland under Labour. That investment will be for infrastructure, railways, buses, housing, hospitals, care, and of course revenue needs as well. It will absolutely help to transform the lives of people in Scotland who have suffered so much because of the austerity that's been passed on to them into their communities. Because it cannot be right that inner city communities all across Scotland still have such levels of deprivation that are a disgrace in any civilized society. And when the United Nations itself sends a rapporteur to Britain to look at levels of poverty and deprivation, you've got to think, hang on a minute, this is Britain, 5th richest country in the world, this is the UK, what's going on? And he, Philip Elstrom, wrote in his report that the social settlement of the 1940s, the social settlement that brought about the welfare state and the principle of a social security net, a safety net that stopped anyone falling into deprivation, has been replaced by what he described as a cold, uncaring ethos that is a shame to the people that have to experience it. That's the UN describing what austerity has done to people in this country, brought to us. Thank you, Tories. Thank you, Lib Dems. We will change it. And we'll change it by investment, and we'll change it by the investment I've talked about, but we'll also change it by dealing with and addressing the greatest issue that faces the whole world at the present time, and that is the issue of climate change, the issue of the damage that we are doing to our natural world. I went to the Paris climate change talks in 2015, and I met many absolutely fascinating people from poor countries around the world that themselves done no damage to the environment at all, but were suffering unusual weather patterns, were suffering from rising sea levels, and suffering regular flooding of their homes. And they were fully in support of the Paris Climate Change Accord, which moves towards net zero emissions. Our party conference is very ambitious, voted that we should achieve net zero by 2030 if we're in office to achieve it. But it does mean dramatic work by all of us. And we've set up a group within the shadow cabinet of Sue Hayman, Becky Long-Bailey and Barry Gardner, and Danny Rowley, one of our fantastic candidates in Midlothian, is our spokesperson on this as well. And I was with Danny this afternoon campaigning in Midlothian. What we're doing is putting forward nothing short of a green industrial revolution. That green industrial revolution will mean investment in sustainable energy, solar, wind, wave. It will mean investment in offshore wind farms. It will mean the manufacture of those. And having been with Leslie and Richard in Fife to try and defend BIFAB and its workers, I simply say this: there's something slightly ridiculous about manufacturing wind turbine towers in Indonesia, shipping them halfway around the world, giving out God knows what emissions on the way, when they could have been made there in Fife in the first place, where those skilled workers and that brilliant industrial record of Fife is available for them. And so our whole task will be to invest in the technologies of the future and at the same time help to bring about a more sustainable world. And it doesn't stop just at energy generation and electric vehicles and electric buses. It also goes on to retrofitting homes all over the country, making them energy efficient, making them cheaper to live in and using less energy as a result of it. So the jobs that will be created from this are immense. The jobs that will be created in the manufacture and maintenance of the energy plants that we're developing, and the jobs that will be created in retrofitting so many homes all across the country. And Scotland is blessed with many things. It's blessed with mountains, it's blessed with rivers, it's blessed with lakes, it's blessed with good weather sometimes, and it's blessed with a lot of wind. It comes off the Atlantic and it doesn't stop. It's not an accident that those trees on the Western Hebrides are sort of at that angle rather than that angle. And so it seems to me a very good place to have a wind farm to generate a lot of electricity. Almost 5% of the whole of the UK's electricity could be generated from there. So it is about harnessing those skills that Scotland is so famous for. The country that built the ships, that built the planes, and built so much manufacturing. We were in Dundee this morning, a city that's made such a massive contribution to the lives of so many, and now so many of those industries gone. There is a place for all of this. But you don't do it if you leave it to the market. You don't do it if you only deal with companies going under on a case-by-case basis. And Richard has made this clear so many times. What we need in Holyrood is a government that has a serious industrial economic development strategy for Scotland. And that's what Richard and Leslie will bring forward in the future. And so on the world stage, we would be, I hope, hosting COP26 next year, may even be held in Glasgow. How good would that be for a Labour government to be hosting that and working with people all across the world to try and reduce emissions, to improve the possibility of sustainability and protect species from destruction. We have to think about things very differently, not in a process of fear, but in a process of saying this problem also gives us an opportunity. But wouldn't it be good to have a Labour government that is saying to the government of Brazil, we recognise where you are, we recognise your place in the world, but we also recognise that you are hosts to an enormous and beautiful rainforest. Please don't burn it down. Like we say to others elsewhere, don't burn it down, because we want to live in that sustainable world. And so it is in this election about the direction we go in the future. I've been an activist all my life in our party, in our movement, in our unions, and an activist for human rights and justice around the world. And I want to lead a Labour government whose watchword on the international stage is exactly that: peace, justice, and human rights. And that we would make that the basis of our foreign policy. Because the wars of the past have consequences for the future. Those poor people in refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Libya, and so many other places, those people have lives too, have hopes too, and have opportunities too. So let's not scapegoat refugees who themselves are victims of human rights abuse, wars, and environmental degradation. Let's work together to deal with the problems at source, so we don't end up with wars and refugee flows all around this world. It is about how we treat people and how we treat each other that I'm so passionate about. And so we go out over the next few weeks, the next 4 weeks, campaigning all around the country. Politics is often presented by media analysts, who are very brilliant people and very, very well educated and very intelligent, as like a retail transaction. You offer this, I offer that, you do this, you do that. It doesn't actually empower people. It makes people spectators in their own democracy, spectators in their own politics. Shouldn't politics also be about the empowerment of people? Didn't those great people of Red Clydeside stand up to empower people? Didn't Mary Barber in Glasgow empower the women of Glasgow to give them power over the landlords that were so exploiting their lives? Didn't those great socialist campaigners always seek to empower people by the process of thought and what they wanted to achieve in the world? And so this election campaign is already a fascinating experience. Fascinating because of the numbers of people that have come forward to work with us on our policies in the party. 500,000 members of the Labour Party, and rising every day. And when we produce our manifesto, we're discussing it this weekend, produce the final document in the very near future. It's going to be bigger, better, and I'm not sure I'm pleased to say longer than the last one, so you'll need a bit of reading time for it. But it's going to be one that has been contributed to by very expert people in all of our offices, all of our trade unions, but it's also been contributed to by lots of people all around the country who themselves are experts. If you want to work out how a care system should be run, who better to ask than a care worker who has to work within that system? If you want to know how a transport system should be run, ask those that work within it. And so our manifesto will reflect all of that experience and all of that brilliance that's there all over the country. The smartest people are not always in the most obvious places. Talk to anyone you meet, and don't assume that you know everything, because everybody you meet knows something you don't know. We can learn from each other. And when we learn from each other, we're stronger as a result of it. Communities are empowered and stronger as a result of that. And that is what's so exciting about the manifesto and the programme that we are putting forward. And yes, there will be public ownership in it. There will be support for cooperatives. There will be rights to workers to take over companies that are going under. There will be rights of representation on football club boards as well as the boards of industry and so on. But there will also be public ownership of our railway system, public ownership of our Royal Mail, and public ownership of our power delivery grid. And I feel very passionate about all of those, and having talked to postal workers all over the country who tell me they love their job, they love the communities they work with, and they feel obliged to those communities they deliver the letters to, feel stressed out beyond belief by the methods that are being employed by the privatised management and the stress they're put under, that they can't wait to leave a job that they thought they were in for the rest of their lives and loved so much. And when you have a former public company now run by its directors and its shareholders that pays £6 million before its managing director even gets there, and then says they can't afford the pension of those that deliver the letters, you ask yourself what kind of economists they really are. Wouldn't it be better if it was publicly owned and publicly run, and those brilliant people that deliver the letters had a say in the management of it? Because they're the ones that know how to do it. They're the ones that can organise that company. And so our election is about empowerment. And when we win that election on December the 12th, who wins? Is it individuals who get elected into office? Or is it the nurse who wins, the office worker who wins, the factory worker who wins, the bus driver who wins, the person that sweeps the street who wins, the person who cares for those in desperate need, the person that advises those that are going through mental health stress? In reality, when we win this election, we all win this election, because we're creating a society that works for the many, not the few. I'm so proud of our party and what it's achieved, and I'm so proud of what the party's doing all across Scotland, and I'm looking forward to gaining constituencies all across Scotland as the road to getting a Labour government on December the 12th, which will work for the interests of everybody across this society. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. Thank you for your support. Thank you for what you're achieving. Some music in a moment. We're going to have more music from Callum. He's coming on in a moment. But can you all be happy for a second while we take a big picture? Is that okay? Try and be happy.